He was standing barely 2 feet away from me. Close enough that I could see the confidence in his eyes. The relaxed posture of someone who believed the conversation was already won. He looked me straight in the face and lied. Not nervously, not awkwardly. Not like someone afraid of being caught. But smoothly, comfortably. Almost proudly. And as he spoke, nodding slightly like he was telling the truth for the 100th time, I felt a very specific sensation spread through my body. It wasn't rage. It wasn't shock. It was the cold realization that this student genuinely believed I was stupid. That I was inexperienced. That I was just some young foreign professor who didn't know how things really worked here. In that moment, I made a quiet decision. I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to accuse him. I was going to let him keep believing that lie. Because nothing is more dangerous than a confident man walking straight into a trap he can't see. If you have ever been underestimated, disrespected, or treated like you were easy to fool simply because you stayed calm and professional, then you are going to enjoy this story. Go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me until the very end. Because this is not a story about shouting or public humiliation. This is about patience, control, and the kind of revenge that follows every rule while still delivering maximum pain to the people who thought they were untouchable. By profession, I am a cancer researcher. The kind of work I do rarely gets attention outside of academic circles. It's quiet, technical, and mentally exhausting. I spend countless hours working with medical images such as MRI scans and CT scans. Not just looking at them, but processing them. Transforming raw data into meaningful information. Image processing isn't glamorous. It's precision work. It's the kind of field where tiny mistakes create massive consequences. And where you develop an almost obsessive attention to detail. Alongside that research work, I also code. A lot. Anyone who has ever coded seriously knows that after enough years, you stop just reading code and start recognizing it. Styles, habits, shortcuts, mistakes. Code becomes personal, almost like handwriting. That background is why I was invited to work as a guest professor at a university school of medicine. My role was to teach imaging, including the image processing side that many students find difficult. This wasn't a course where you could just memorize slides and pass an exam. It required actual understanding, actual effort, actual work. At the time, I was in my late 20s. I was not native to the country. And it was my very first year teaching at this particular university. On paper, none of that mattered. In reality, it mattered a lot to certain students. They didn't see a specialist. They didn't see someone trusted enough to teach future doctors. They saw a young foreign professor and quietly decided I was inexperienced, unsure of myself, and easy to manipulate. I noticed it early on in subtle ways. The casual tone some students used when speaking to me. The smirks when I emphasized rules. The way a few of them behaved as if deadlines and academic honesty were more like suggestions than requirements. I ignored it. Not because I didn't notice, but because experience had taught me that respect is best earned through consistency, not confrontation. I focused on teaching, on explaining concepts clearly, on giving students every possible chance to succeed honestly. As part of my module, students were required to submit 2 written reports. Each report was worth 10% of their final grade, which meant these assignments were not optional or insignificant. They were designed to test understanding of image processing techniques and required students to write and explain code. This wasn't something you could bluff your way through. If you didn't understand the material, it would show immediately. When submission time came, I began grading the reports systematically. I didn't rush. I wanted to be fair, consistent, and accurate. Most of the reports fell exactly where you would expect. Some students clearly worked hard and showed solid understanding. Some struggled but at least tried. Some did the bare minimum, producing weak but original work. And then I reached a small cluster of reports that made me stop scrolling. They weren't just similar. They were identical. Same structure. Same phrasing. Same variable names in the code. Same mistakes. Same misunderstandings. The only thing that changed from one report to the next was the student's name on the first page. My first reaction was disbelief, followed almost immediately by a tired kind of disappointment. What made it worse was that these reports weren't even good. They were full of errors, conceptual mistakes, broken logic, sloppy explanations. I recognized them instantly because, before grading, I had reviewed reports from previous years to establish a grading baseline. These students hadn't just cheated. They had cheated lazily. To be absolutely certain, I ran them through a plagiarism checker. The result came back at 98% similarity. At that point, there was no ambiguity. According to university rules, this meant a 0. No partial credit. No discussion. No warnings. So I did exactly what policy required. I graded those reports with a 0 and continued grading the rest of the class. I didn't send emails. I didn't make announcements. I didn't confront anyone. I simply did my job and moved on. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. What those students didn't know was that while I was calm on the surface, something had shifted internally. Not anger yet, but awareness. Awareness of who thought they could play me, and how far they were willing to go. While grading was still ongoing, I began running into students in the hallways. Casual encounters. Small talk. Polite questions. Most of them asked general things like when grades would be released. Then one day, one of the students from the cheating group approached me. He smiled, relaxed, almost friendly, and asked when I thought the grades would be available. Then, without being prompted, he launched into a story about how hard he had worked on the reports, how much time he had invested, how his exam hadn't gone very well, and how he was really counting on the reports to help him pass the module. As he spoke, I felt my jaw tighten slightly. Because I knew. I knew exactly how much work he had put into those reports. I knew every copied line, every borrowed mistake. And now he was standing there, looking me in the eye, lying without hesitation. This wasn't faceless online cheating anymore. This was personal. Direct. Intentional. I kept my expression neutral. I told him, calmly, that I couldn't comment on grades before they were officially released. He nodded, thanked me, and walked away, completely convinced that his performance had fooled me. And as I watched him leave, I realized something very important. These students didn't just cheat. They believed they were smarter than me. And that belief was about to cost them far more than they could imagine. After that hallway conversation, I didn't confront anyone. I didn't send warning emails. I didn't even sigh dramatically at my desk. I went back to grading like nothing had happened. But internally I was paying much closer attention. You see, cheating on an online submission is one thing. People do stupid things when they think they're anonymous. But looking someone in the eye and lying to them directly takes a different kind of arrogance. That's not desperation. That's entitlement. And entitlement, especially in academic environments, has a way of collapsing under its own weight if you give it enough time. The semester exam came next. This was the final exam, the last one of the term. And historically it marked the unofficial end of the academic year. Once students finished that exam, most of them mentally checked out. Bags packed. Tickets booked. Summer plans ready. They knew that after this, there would be nothing left to do but wait for grades to appear online. I knew this too. And that timing mattered more than they realized. I corrected the exams carefully, the same way I corrected everything else. No shortcuts. No emotional grading. Just strict, consistent evaluation. When I finally had all the numbers in front of me, I opened my spreadsheet and started calculating final grades. That's when the picture became very clear. 4 students had received zeros on their reports due to plagiarism. With those zeros included, they failed the module outright. But here's where it got interesting. If I hypothetically gave those students 50% on their reports instead of 0, they would still fail the module. Barely, but undeniably. That meant something important. Even with generosity, even with benefit of the doubt, they had no mathematical path to passing. That was the moment I made my decision. If this were just about grades, I could have ended it there. Zeros, fails, done. But those students didn't just cheat. They insulted my intelligence. They assumed my age, my accent, and my position made me weak. So instead of exposing them immediately, I decided to do something far more effective. I adjusted the grading curve for everyone else. Students who had clearly studied, who understood the material, but whose reports were dragging them down slightly got a small bump. Nothing outrageous. Just enough to be fair. Several students went from 49% overall to 50% and passed. They earned it. Their work was flawed, but it was honest. And honesty mattered to me more than perfection. The cheaters, however, stayed exactly where they were. Failing. Quietly. Invisibly. And now the stage was set. At this university, students have the right to request a grade review after grades are published. But before they are officially locked for the year, the purpose of these meetings is simple. The student sits with the professor, goes through the exam and assignments, and tries to argue for additional points. Sometimes it works. Sometimes professors spot small mistakes or decide to be lenient. It's a standard process. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that the cheaters would request those meetings. After all, they believed they had already fooled me once. In their minds, they still had half the report points left to negotiate. So I waited. The day grades went live, my inbox started filling almost immediately. Polite emails at first. Confused emails. Then emotional ones. The 4 students all wrote within hours of each other. They didn't understand how their reports only got 50%. They insisted they had worked extremely hard. They expressed shock and disappointment. And, of course, they requested appointments to review their grades. I'll be honest. I felt a flash of satisfaction reading those emails. Not because they were failing, but because they were walking exactly where I wanted them to walk. I replied politely, professionally, and quickly. Yes, of course, I would be happy to review their grades. We could schedule an appointment within the next 3 days, as per university policy. That's when reality hit them. Because the exam I mentioned earlier, it was the last one of the semester. Most students were already on vacation. Some were in other countries. Some had gone home to their families. One student admitted he was several hours away by train. Another said he had already booked a flight. They all asked the same question in different words. Could we do the meeting online? The answer was no. University policy. Grade reviews had to be in person. No exceptions. And there was another detail they hadn't considered. They had exactly 3 days to attend the review. If they didn't show up within that window, their grades would be locked permanently. Suddenly, their casual cheating had consequences beyond a number on a screen. Vacations were interrupted. Flights were changed. Long bus rides were booked. Money was spent. Time was lost. And all of it was self-inflicted. I didn't force them to come back. I didn't threaten them. I simply followed the rules they thought they could bend. Over the next 3 days, they arrived one by one. Tired. Frustrated. Slightly nervous. But still hopeful. They believed these meetings would be quick. 10 minutes. Maybe 15. A small discussion. A few extra points. Problem solved. They didn't realize that I had no intention of giving them anything. Not because I was cruel, but because fairness demanded it. When the first student sat down across from me, I smiled politely and opened his file. I told him we would review the exam and the reports in detail. Just like the policy required. He nodded confidently. Still playing the role. Still pretending. And that's when I began asking questions. Simple ones at first. Why did you choose this method? What was your reasoning here? Can you explain this section of code? His answers were vague. Rambling. Noncommittal. I moved slowly. Methodically. Point by point. Error by error. Every mistake was explained. Every misunderstanding was corrected. I lectured him on material he should have known. Material he claimed to have worked so hard on. Minutes turned into an hour. Then another. His confidence faded. His posture changed. His voice got quieter. When he realized what was happening, he tried to end the meeting early. I reminded him calmly that we needed to complete the full grade review. University policy. And so I continued. By the time he left, he looked exhausted. Not just physically, but emotionally. And I knew the next 3 days were going to be unforgettable. By the time the second student sat across from me, I had refined my approach. I wasn't angry. I wasn't aggressive. I was calm, polite, and painfully thorough. I opened his exam first, going through each section carefully, pointing out where marks were lost and why. He nodded along, trying to appear engaged. But I could tell his mind was still fixed on the reports. That was where he thought his escape route was. That was where he believed the extra points would come from. When we reached the reports, I slowed down even more. I asked him to explain his reasoning behind specific choices in the code. Why this function? Why this processing method? Why this parameter? The questions weren't tricky. They were basic. The kind of questions someone who actually wrote the code should be able to answer instantly. He couldn't. His responses came out fragmented, filled with technical buzzwords that didn't quite fit. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable before explaining in detail why each choice was wrong and how it should have been done. As the minutes passed, his confidence visibly eroded. His shoulders slumped. His voice dropped. The hopeful tone he had walked in with slowly disappeared. At one point, he tried to redirect the conversation, saying he had worked very hard and that maybe the grading was a little harsh. I reminded him, calmly, that effort alone doesn't replace understanding, and that the purpose of the review was accuracy, not sympathy. The third and fourth students followed the same pattern. They came in with rehearsed explanations and forced smiles, clearly believing that persistence would wear me down. Instead, I wore them down. Hour after hour, I dissected their work line by line. explaining every flaw, every misconception, every copied mistake. When they realized I knew the material better than they ever had, something shifted in their eyes. They stopped arguing. They stopped bargaining. They simply listened, trapped by policy, by their own decisions, and by the reality they had tried to avoid. By the end of those 3 days, none of them asked for extra points anymore. They just wanted to leave. Each one walked out of my office looking smaller than when they had arrived, carrying the quiet understanding that they hadn't fooled anyone. They had lost their time, their money, their vacations, and their dignity. And there was still one final realization waiting for them. By the time the last appointment ended, the office felt strangely quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that lingers after something irreversible has happened. Each of them had come in believing this was a formality, a short discussion, a minor inconvenience on the way back to summer freedom. Instead, they walked out with the same hollow expression, the look people have when a door closes behind them, and they finally understand it's locked for good. None of them said much at the end. No arguments. No anger. Just short nods and forced politeness, as if words themselves had become too heavy. It was during those final minutes, as they gathered their bags and stood up to leave, that the truth fully settled in. They realized I hadn't missed the plagiarism. I hadn't overlooked their shortcuts. I hadn't been fooled by their confidence or their lies. I had known from the very beginning. The mistake they made wasn't cheating alone. It was assuming I wouldn't notice, and worse, assuming I wouldn't care. That realization hit them harder than any accusation ever could. Some of them tried one last time to soften the situation. Quiet apologies. Awkward explanations about stress, pressure, fear of failing. I listened without interrupting. Then calmly explained that the grades were final and accurate. No anger. No lecture about ethics. Just facts. I reminded them that the review process existed to correct mistakes, not to erase dishonesty. And then I said the sentence that truly ended it for them. Their final grade meant they had failed the module. That's when the weight of everything crashed down on them at once. The interrupted vacations. The money spent on travel. The hours wasted sitting across from me while I explained material they had pretended to understand. All of it led to the same outcome they could have avoided by doing the work honestly. And now, there was nothing left to argue. As they stood there, I added one final detail, almost casually, as if it were an afterthought. Failing the module meant they would have to repeat it the following year. The same content. The same assignments. And most importantly, the same instructor. Me. I watched their faces carefully as that sank in. A mix of embarrassment, dread, and quiet panic flickered across their expressions. They nodded, thanked me, and left without another word. I sat alone in my office after the door closed, feeling something close to relief. Not triumph. Not joy. Just the calm satisfaction of knowing that fairness had been upheld. I hadn't broken any rules. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't accused them publicly or embarrassed them in front of others. I had simply allowed their own decisions to carry them exactly where they deserved to go. In the days that followed, life returned to its normal rhythm. But something had shifted beneath the surface. The grades were officially locked, the review window closed, and the semester ended without any formal complaints. On paper, it was just another academic term. In reality, it was a quiet lesson in consequences. I later learned through casual conversations and administrative chatter that those students had gone home defeated. Vacations that were supposed to be filled with relaxation and celebration turned into weeks of stress. Awkward explanations to family members. and the slow realization that their own choices had put them there. Failing a module in medical school isn't just a bad mark. It delays progress. It complicates schedules. It forces uncomfortable conversations. And in their case, it ensured that next year, they would walk back into the same classroom they thought they had conquered. Not long after, I brought the situation to my supervisor, who also happened to be the course director. I wanted transparency. I laid out everything calmly. The plagiarism, the grade reviews. The policies followed. He listened, nodded, and then told me something that confirmed I had made the right choice. The university, he explained, preferred to avoid formal cheating accusations whenever possible. Legal complications, appeals, administrative nightmares. Reporting them officially would have turned a clear-cut academic issue into a long, messy process. In other words, I couldn't even accuse them outright. What I had done, however, was completely within the rules. Fair. Documented. Unassailable. He approved my handling of the situation without hesitation. Some people later questioned one detail: the grade bump I gave to other students. But that decision was deliberate and thoughtful. Those students had studied. They understood the material. Their exams showed it clearly. Their reports were weak, but they were honest. I wasn't rewarding laziness. I was recognizing genuine effort and understanding. Most of them passed by the narrowest margin, moving from 49 to 50% overall. And when they received their results, the gratitude in their emails was quiet, sincere, and earned. That contrast mattered to me. It reinforced that fairness doesn't mean being rigid. It means being just. As for the 4 students who cheated, there was no dramatic confrontation afterward. No angry emails, no appeals. They didn't argue. Because they couldn't. They knew exactly why they had failed. They knew I knew, and they knew they had underestimated the wrong person. The most satisfying part wasn't watching them suffer. It was watching arrogance collapse into silence. Watching entitlement give way to humility. Watching people realize that intelligence doesn't always announce itself loudly. And power doesn't always need to shout. The following academic year, I saw their names again on my class list. Same module, same instructor. Same rules. This time, there were no smirks. No casual disrespect, no assumptions. They sat quietly, took notes, and treated the course with the seriousness it had always deserved. When I greeted the class on the first day, I caught a few familiar eyes quickly looking away. I simply smiled and began the lecture like nothing had happened. Looking back, I don't consider what I did cruel or excessive. I didn't ruin their careers. I didn't publicly shame them. I didn't bend the rules to hurt them. I did the opposite. I followed the system exactly as it was designed. And I allowed their own choices to do the rest. That's the kind of justice that lasts. The kind that teaches without screaming. The kind that stays with you long after the moment has passed. And if there's one lesson in all of this, it's simple. Never assume someone is weak just because they're quiet. Never confuse patience with ignorance. And never mistake professionalism for lack of awareness. Sometimes the person you think you fooled is the one patiently holding the door, while you walk straight into the consequences of your own actions. If this story satisfied your sense of justice even a little, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more real, emotionally charged Reddit revenge stories. And tell us in the comments, what's the most satisfying moment of quiet revenge you've ever witnessed or experienced? Because sometimes, the sweetest payback isn't loud at all. It's watching someone realize, far too late, that they played themselves.